Elena Brooks had built her life around caring for others. Long shifts at the hospital in Seattle blurred into sleepless nights, her routine stitched together by the steady rhythm of monitors and quiet patient reassurances. She was dependable, calm under pressure, the kind of nurse people remembered long after discharge. But when the uniform came off, silence greeted her like an old companion. Her apartment was small, neat, and painfully still. A single lamp cast warm light across untouched dinner plates and books she never finished. Friends had drifted over the years. Marriages, children, distance. Elena told herself she was content. She told herself she didn't need more. That lie lasted until the message appeared. It was late, past midnight, when she first saw his name. Daniel. His profile picture showed a confident smile, kind eyes that seemed to look directly into hers. His first message was simple, almost hesitant. "I think you have a beautiful soul." She nearly ignored it. But something made her pause. Their conversation started cautiously, then unfolded with surprising ease. Daniel spoke of life in Nigeria, colorful streets, warm family gatherings, a culture rich with love and tradition. He asked about her work, her dreams, her past. And when she answered, really answered, he listened. No one had listened like that in a long time. Days turned into weeks. Their messages became calls, their calls stretched into hours. Elena found herself smiling at her phone during breaks, staying awake long after exhaustion should have claimed her. Daniel's voice carried warmth, reassurance, something dangerously close to belonging. "You've spent your life giving to others," he told her one night, his tone soft, almost protective. "When will someone take care of you?" The question lingered. He spoke of destiny, as if their meeting wasn't chance but something written long before either of them knew it. He painted a future so vivid she could almost touch it, a home filled with laughter, a wedding surrounded by family, a life where she would never feel alone again. "You deserve more than empty rooms," he said gently. "Come here. Start fresh with me." Elena hesitated at first. The distance, the uncertainty, it should have scared her. And somewhere, buried beneath longing, it did. But Daniel had an answer for every doubt, a reassurance for every fear. When she mentioned her concerns, he shared pieces of his own pain. A difficult past. Betrayals that had left him guarded. "But you," he whispered once, "you feel different. Like peace." It was intoxicating. Her co-workers noticed the change. The way she smiled more, the way her attention drifted. One of them, Karen, raised an eyebrow when Elena mentioned Daniel. "You've never met him?" Karen asked carefully. "Not yet," Elena replied, a small smile forming. "But I will." Karen's silence said more than words could. Still, Elena held on. Because for the first time in years, she felt seen. Chosen. Loved. Daniel's tone shifted subtly as weeks passed. More urgency crept into his words. More insistence. He spoke of time wasted, of how life was too short to delay happiness. "Why wait?" he asked one night. "We already know what this is." Elena stared at her reflection after the call ended. Tired eyes. A life paused somewhere between duty and loneliness. And beneath it all, a fragile hope she was almost afraid to touch. The decision came quietly. No dramatic moment. No announcement. Just a late-night search, trembling hands, and a single click. One-way ticket. Seattle to Nigeria. Departure in 5 days. She didn't tell anyone. And as the confirmation email lit up her screen, Elena felt something shift deep inside her. Something irreversible, something she would not fully understand until it was far too late. The cracked phone kept recording long after the street went silent. Wind scraped over the microphone, distorting sound into something almost human, like breath, like whispers. Somewhere in the distance, a faint scuffle echoed, then cut off abruptly. The footage would later be passed around in hushed conversations, replayed frame by frame, people searching for something, anything, that proved he hadn't just vanished into thin air. But Liverpool had already decided the truth. If a name like Pancake was involved, you didn't need evidence. You just needed fear. Long before the name became legend, before people spoke it like a warning, James Taylor was just another boy no one noticed. Or worse, one they chose to ignore. The flat he grew up in smelled of damp walls and cheap alcohol. Nights were unpredictable. Sometimes quiet. Sometimes not. Most times, James learned to read the air before anything happened. The shift in tone, the heavy footsteps, the silence that came just before shouting. He learned early. Stay quiet, stay small, don't react. It didn't always work. Stand up, his father would snap, voice thick with drink. James didn't move fast enough. The chair scraped violently as it was kicked aside. A hand grabbed his collar, dragging him up like he weighed nothing. I said stand up. The first hit came quick. The second harder. By the third, James stopped making noise. That's when it changed. Pain stopped being something to fear. It became something to absorb. Something to understand. School wasn't much different. Kids could smell weakness. They circled it, tested it, pushed until they got a reaction. James gave them nothing, until one day, something snapped. It started with laughter. A group of boys, older, bigger, cornering him behind the building. One of them shoved him, another grabbed his bag, tossing it aside. Look at him, one sneered. Doesn't even fight back. James stayed still. Say something. Another shove. Then another. And then. He moved. It wasn't fast. It wasn't clean. But it was final. James grabbed the closest one and slammed his face straight into the concrete. Once. Twice. Again. The sound was sickening, wet, heavy, unnatural. The laughter turned into shouting, then panic. Stop. Stop. But James didn't stop. By the time teachers pulled him off, the boy's face was barely recognizable. Blood pooled beneath him, spreading across the pavement like something spilled and forgotten. No one called him James after that. They called him Pancake. And just like that, fear replaced pity. It didn't take long for the streets to notice. That's where he met him. No one ever said the man's name. Not properly. He didn't need one. He had presence, the kind that filled space without trying. Older, calm, always watching. You've got something in you, the man said one evening, leaning against a railing as James stood nearby, knuckles still bruised. James didn't respond. Most people break when life hits them, the man continued. You didn't. A pause. You hit back. That was the beginning. The man didn't teach him how to fight. James already knew that. He taught him control, patience, when to act, and more importantly, when not to. Fear isn't about what you do, he said once. It's about what people think you might do. James listened. And he learned. Years passed, and the boy disappeared into something else entirely. Something sharper, colder, more precise. People stopped testing him. Then they started avoiding him. Then, eventually, obeying him. But even power has roots. And roots can rot. The night it happened, no one heard a thing. No shouting. No struggle. Just silence. The man was found the next morning, slumped in his chair, eyes open but empty. No signs of forced entry. No clear cause. Just a stillness that didn't belong. Police asked questions. Neighbors shrugged. No one knew anything. But whispers started anyway. Quiet. Careful. Dangerous. He was the only one close to Pancake. Closer than anyone. Too close. No one accused him outright. No one was that stupid. But the idea settled in the same way his name once had, slow, heavy, impossible to ignore. Because if fear was something James Taylor had learned, then maybe this was the moment he stopped being taught. And started deciding. The whispers about his mentor never found a voice. They didn't need one. In Liverpool, silence had its own language, and James Taylor had become fluent in it. People stopped asking questions not because they found answers, but because they understood the cost of curiosity. And James, he never denied anything. That was the trick. He didn't confirm the rumors. Didn't defend himself. He simply let them exist, let them grow, let them twist into something far more powerful than truth. Because fear, he had learned, thrived best in uncertainty. Within months, everything shifted. The same streets that once watched him bleed now stepped aside when he walked through them. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Doors closed quietly. Even the air felt heavier around him, like it carried weight it couldn't explain. James didn't demand respect. He allowed people to imagine what would happen if they didn't give it. And that imagination did the work for him. "Word travels fast," a voice said one night. James stood at the edge of a dimly lit warehouse, overlooking a small gathering of men below. Deals were being made. Cash exchanged hands. No one argued. No one hesitated. Because James was there. Reese stepped beside him, arms folded. He was one of the few who didn't flinch in James's presence, but even that confidence felt measured, careful. "You've built something," Reese added. James didn't look at him. "No," he said quietly. "They built it." Reese frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means people need something to believe in," James replied. "Fear is just the easiest option." Below them, a man hesitated before handing over a package. His hands shook slightly. James noticed. He always noticed. A single glance, nothing more, and Reese stepped forward, moving down the stairs. No words were exchanged. No threats made. But the message was clear. The man didn't hesitate again. That's how it worked now. James didn't chase power. Power came to him. And with it came loyalty, not the kind built on trust, but the kind built on survival. People stayed close because being near him felt safer than being against him. They spoke carefully, moved carefully, lived carefully. Because they believed he saw everything. And sometimes, he did. But even empires built on silence have cracks. She was one of them. Ellie. She didn't belong in places like this. That was the first thing James noticed. The second was that she didn't seem to care. They met in a cafe, neutral ground, quiet, ordinary. The kind of place where no one expected anything dangerous to happen. She sat by the window, sunlight catching in her hair, completely unaware, or pretending to be. "You're staring," she said without looking up. James didn't respond immediately. He studied her, the way she held herself, the calm in her posture. Most people avoided eye contact with him. She didn't. "Do I know you?" she asked, finally meeting his gaze. A pause. Then, simply, "No." She smiled faintly. "Then why do I feel like you do?" It was a strange question. James wasn't used to strange. But something about her didn't trigger the usual instincts. No tension. No calculation. Just curiosity. "Maybe you're just good at reading people," he said. "Or maybe you're bad at hiding," she replied. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Days turned into weeks. Conversations turned into something else. Something quieter. More personal. She asked questions others wouldn't dare to. Not about his work, not directly, but about him. And sometimes, he answered. Not everything. Never everything. But enough. "You don't seem like what people say," she told him one evening. James leaned back slightly. "And what do they say?" She hesitated. "That you're dangerous." A faint smile touched his lips. "And you don't believe that?" "I think people exaggerate what they don't understand." He studied her again, more carefully this time. "You should be careful," he said. "Why?" she asked. "Because sometimes, they're not exaggerating." She didn't look away. "Good," she said softly. "I don't like boring people." It was reckless. It was unexpected. And somehow, it worked. For the first time in years, something existed in James's life that wasn't built on fear. Something that didn't rely on silence or control. But that didn't mean it was safe. Because Ellie wasn't as simple as she seemed. She noticed things. Patterns. Absences. The way people reacted when James entered a room. The way conversations shifted. The way no one ever said certain names out loud. Including his. One night, after leaving his place, she walked alone through a quiet street. The air felt different. Tense, like it carried something unseen. Her phone buzzed. She frowned, pulling it from her pocket. An unknown number. A single message. No greeting. No explanation. Just words. You don't know who you're sleeping with. Ellie stopped walking. The street suddenly felt too quiet. Too empty. She read the message again, slower this time. Her expression didn't change. But something behind her eyes did. And somewhere, not far away, someone was watching. The message stayed on Ellie's screen longer than it should have. You don't know who you're sleeping with. She read it once. Then again. Not with fear, but with recognition. As if the words had confirmed something she already suspected, something she had been quietly building in the back of her mind. By the time she slipped her phone back into her pocket, her expression had settled into calm again. Controlled. Careful. The next time she saw James, nothing in her demeanor hinted at the shift. You look tired, she said softly, stepping into his space like she belonged there. James studied her for a moment. Busy. That's your answer for everything. It usually works. She smiled faintly, reaching up to adjust his collar. The gesture was intimate, natural, but her eyes lingered longer than necessary, observing, measuring. James noticed. He always noticed. You're thinking too much, he said. Maybe, she replied. Or maybe you're not thinking enough. A quiet tension passed between them, subtle but present. Not conflict, something else. Something that lived just beneath the surface. Over time, Ellie became the only person who spoke to him without hesitation. She didn't flinch at his silence or fill it with nervous words. She let it exist, and somehow, that made him stay. You trust me? She asked one evening, her voice low as they sat in the dim light of his apartment. James didn't answer immediately. Trust wasn't something he gave. It wasn't even something he believed in. But Ellie wasn't asking like everyone else did. She wasn't asking for reassurance. She was testing something. I let you stay, he said finally. That's not the same thing. It's close enough. She leaned back slightly, studying him. You don't let people get close. No, he agreed. Then why me? Another pause. James looked at her, not through her, not past her, but directly at her. For a brief moment, something shifted. Not weakness. Not quite vulnerability. But something unfamiliar. You didn't try, he said. Ellie tilted her head slightly. Try what? To be afraid. The answer lingered between them. It should have felt like honesty. Instead, it felt like something else. Because Ellie wasn't fearless. She was prepared. Their connection deepened, but so did the imbalance. James began adjusting his routines without realizing it. Shorter meetings, fewer late nights, moments carved out just for her. People noticed. Reese noticed most of all. This isn't like you, Reese said one night, his tone careful but firm. James didn't look up. What isn't? Her. A pause. She's a distraction. James's expression hardened slightly. She's not your concern. Reese hesitated. Everything around you is my concern. That earned a glance. Sharp. Measured. Then be concerned quietly, James said. The message was clear. Drop it. And Reese did, but not because he agreed. Meanwhile, Ellie's world moved on a different rhythm. Every conversation, every glance, every silence, it all meant something. She paid attention to details others ignored. The way James avoided certain topics. The way names went unspoken. The way people reacted when they thought he wasn't looking. She wasn't just involved. She was learning. And the more she learned, the heavier it became. That night, she left his apartment later than usual. The streets were quieter, the air colder. Her steps were steady, but her mind wasn't. She turned a corner, then another, until the noise of the main road faded behind her. A car waited at the end of the street. Engine off. Lights dim. Ellie approached without hesitation. The passenger door opened. Inside, a man sat in plain clothes, his posture rigid, eyes sharp. Not unfamiliar, but not someone she acknowledged openly. You're late, he said. Traffic, she replied calmly, sliding into the seat. The door closed. Silence filled the space for a moment. Then she reached into her bag. Her movements were precise. No hesitation. No second thoughts. She pulled out a thin file. The man glanced at it, then back at her. "This everything?" Ellie's expression didn't change. "For now." He took it slowly, reading the label on the front. "Taylor." The word sat between them like something dangerous. "You're getting close," he said quietly. Ellie looked ahead, her voice steady. "I'm already there." Outside, the street remained empty. Inside the car, the line between truth and betrayal had already been crossed. The car disappeared into the night without headlights. Ellie stood on the pavement for a moment after it left, her reflection faint in the dark window of a nearby shop. The file was gone from her hands, but its weight lingered, pressing somewhere deeper than her thoughts. For the first time since this began, the line she had been walking felt thinner, more fragile, and harder to ignore. Across the city, James felt something shift. He couldn't explain it, not clearly. There was no single moment, no obvious trigger. Just a quiet disruption in the pattern. Conversations that ended too quickly. Eyes that lingered too long before looking away. Movements that felt slightly off, slightly delayed. He had built his world on control. Now, something inside it wasn't obeying. "You're reading into things," Reese said, leaning against the table, arms crossed. James didn't respond immediately. He stared at the map spread out in front of him, though his focus wasn't on the streets or the marked locations. "It's not nothing," James said quietly. Reese exhaled. "People get nervous. That's normal." "No," James replied, finally looking up. "This is different." A pause settled between them. Reese shifted slightly, his usual confidence replaced by something harder to define. "You've got everything running smooth. No one's stepping out of line." "That's the problem." Reese frowned. "What do you mean?" "No one steps out of line unless they think they can get away with it," James said. "And if they think that..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Reese held his gaze, but something about it felt off. Not fear. Not exactly. Just distance. Like a part of him was somewhere else. "You're overthinking," Reese said, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. James noticed. He always noticed. "Maybe," he said, but there was no agreement in it. Later that night, the city felt quieter than usual. Even the usual background noise, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional shout, seemed muted. James walked through his apartment slowly, his movements deliberate. Nothing appeared out of place. Everything exactly where it should be. Too exact. He paused near the window, eyes scanning the street below. A passing car. A flicker of movement in an alley. Nothing that stood out. But the feeling didn't leave. It stayed with him. Meanwhile, Ellie sat alone, her phone resting on the table in front of her. The screen was dark, but she kept glancing at it, as if expecting something to appear. Or disappear. Her thoughts weren't as controlled as before. They moved faster, clashing against each other. This was supposed to be simple. Observe. Report. Stay detached. But James wasn't what she expected. That was the problem. She leaned back, closing her eyes briefly. Fragments of conversations replayed in her mind, his voice, calm but sharp, the way he watched everything, missed nothing. The way he looked at her. That part wasn't supposed to matter. Her phone buzzed suddenly. She opened her eyes and picked it up. A message. No name. Stay focused. 2 words. Cold. Direct. A reminder. Ellie stared at the screen for a moment longer before locking it again. Her reflection stared back at her, steady, composed. But not untouched. Back in the apartment, James moved toward his desk. He didn't rush. He never rushed. A drawer sat slightly open. Just enough to notice. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. Slowly, he pulled the drawer open. Inside, everything appeared normal at first glance. Papers stacked neatly. Items in place. Then he saw it. An envelope. Plain. Unmarked. He didn't remember putting it there. James picked it up, turning it over once before opening it. Photographs slid out. One by one. His apartment. From different angles. The living room. The hallway. The bedroom. Each image taken from inside. His jaw tightened slightly as he flipped through them, slower now. Careful. Precise. Then he stopped. The last photo. Him. Standing near the window. Unaware. Watched. James lowered the photograph, his gaze drifting across the room again. But this time, nothing felt the same. Nothing felt secure. Somewhere, someone had been here. Close enough to see everything. Close enough to leave without a trace. His grip tightened around the photo. And for the first time in a long time, James Taylor didn't feel in control. The photographs didn't leave his hands. Even as the night dragged on, even as the city outside settled into uneasy silence, James stood in the center of his apartment, staring at the images like they might shift if he looked long enough. They didn't. They stayed exactly the same. Precise. Intentional. Personal. Someone had crossed a line no one had ever dared to touch. And they had done it quietly. By morning, the air inside the warehouse felt heavier than usual. No one spoke unless they were spoken to. Even the smallest movements carried tension, like the room itself was waiting for something to break. James stood at the far end, still, composed. Watching. Everyone's here, Reese said, though his voice lacked its usual ease. James didn't respond. He let the silence stretch, let it settle into their bones. One by one, the men shifted under the weight of it, avoiding eye contact, adjusting their stance, breathing just a little too carefully. Then, finally, someone's been inside my place. The words landed like a blow. No one reacted immediately. No denial. No confusion. Just stillness. James stepped forward slowly, holding up one of the photographs. This isn't a guess. He let them see it. The room tightened. You all know what that means, he continued, his tone calm but sharp. This doesn't happen unless someone lets it happen. A murmur started, quiet, uncertain, but James raised his hand slightly. It stopped. Names, he said. No one spoke. The silence returned, thicker now. Reese stepped forward. You really think it's one of us? James didn't look at him. I think someone made a mistake. That's not the same thing. It is when the mistake gets you killed. The words settled hard. A man near the back shifted nervously. Too fast. Too obvious. James noticed. He moved toward him, slow, deliberate. Each step echoed faintly against the concrete floor. You've got something to say? James asked. The man shook his head quickly. No, I swear. Then why are you shaking? I'm not. James grabbed him suddenly, slamming him against the wall. The impact silenced the room completely. You think I don't see it? James said quietly, inches from his face. You think I don't notice when something's off? I didn't do anything, the man gasped. James held his gaze for a moment longer. Then, he hit him. Once. Hard. The man collapsed, groaning, but James didn't stop there. He pulled him back up, forcing him to stand. Say it again, James said. I didn't. Another hit. Say it again. I didn't do it, he shouted, panic breaking through now. I let someone in, all right? I didn't know who they were. The room shifted. James paused. Who? He asked. I don't know, the man said quickly. They said they were with Reese. I thought, it didn't feel wrong. I didn't think. James's grip tightened slightly. You didn't think, he repeated. The man nodded desperately. That's all it was. I swear. I didn't know what they were doing. James let him go. The man dropped to the floor, coughing, clutching his side. But something didn't sit right. Not completely. James turned slightly, his gaze drifting across the room, then landing on Reese. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Reese stepped forward. You're not thinking this is on me. I'm thinking someone used your name, James said. And you believe that? James didn't answer. Because belief wasn't the point. Doubt was. And doubt had already done its job. Later, the room emptied, but the tension didn't leave. It followed James home. Ellie was already there. She stood near the window, arms folded, her posture tense in a way he hadn't seen before. "You need to listen to me," she said as soon as he entered. James closed the door behind him, watching her carefully. "About what?" "Something's wrong," she said. "You're not seeing it clearly." A faint edge crept into his expression. "Then explain it." Ellie hesitated. For the first time since he'd known her, she hesitated. "I can't explain everything," she admitted. "But you need to trust me." That word again. James exhaled slowly. "You want me to trust something you won't even name?" "I'm trying to help you." "By keeping secrets?" Her expression tightened. "You think you're the only one who does that?" The tension snapped, sharp and sudden. James stepped closer. "Be careful." "Or what?" she shot back. "You'll shut me out too." "That depends on what you're hiding." The words hung between them, heavy and unresolved. Ellie looked at him for a long moment, something conflicted flickering beneath her composure. Then she stepped back. "Just, be careful who you trust," she said quietly. James didn't respond. Because now, he wasn't sure who that included. Hours later, the call came. Short. Urgent. No details. James arrived to find the scene already set. Reese lay on the ground, barely conscious, blood staining the concrete beneath him. His breathing was shallow, uneven. His face, bruised, broken, almost unrecognizable. For a moment, everything went still. James crouched beside him, his expression unreadable. "Who did this?" he asked. Reese's eyes struggled to focus, barely finding him. His lips moved. Slow. Weak. "It wasn't me." A pause. Then, with the last of his strength. "It was her. It was her." The words didn't echo. They sank. Heavy. Immediate. Final. James didn't react, not outwardly. His expression remained still as he watched Reese's chest rise and fall in shallow, broken rhythm. Around them, the world felt distant, like sound itself had pulled away. "Stay with me," someone said nearby, but the voice didn't belong to him. James stood slowly. "Her." The word repeated in his mind, not as a question, but as a fracture. Everything that had been uncertain suddenly sharpened into something else. Something dangerous. Because if Reese was telling the truth, then Ellie wasn't just a part of this. She was at the center of it. By the time James reached his apartment, the city had already begun to shift. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Too many, too close. Lights flickered across buildings, red and blue bleeding into the night. He didn't rush. He never rushed. But something about the silence inside felt wrong the moment he stepped in. "Ellie." No response. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that sounded louder than it should have. Then, "I was wondering how long it would take." Her voice. Calm. Steady. She stepped out from the shadows near the window, her face partially lit by the glow outside. There was no panic in her eyes. No attempt to hide. Just acceptance. James studied her, every detail, every shift in posture, every breath. "You want to explain?" he asked. Ellie exhaled slowly. "It's not that simple." "It never is," he replied. "But start anyway." A pause. She looked at him, not cautiously, not defensively, but like she had already decided something long before this moment. "I didn't plan it like this," she said. James's jaw tightened slightly. "So there was a plan?" "Yes." The word didn't waver. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not surprise, not anger. Something colder. "How long?" he asked. Ellie hesitated. "Long enough." That was enough. The distance between them shifted, not physically, but in everything else. The quiet understanding, the fragile connection, it fractured, piece by piece. "You got close," James said. That was the point. It wasn't supposed to become real. His expression didn't change, but the words landed. "Real," he repeated. Ellie stepped closer, her voice softer now. You think I don't see what this is doing to you? What this is doing to me, he echoed. Yes, she said. You're not the man you pretend to be. And you are, he shot back. A flicker of emotion crossed her face, brief, but undeniable. No, she admitted. I'm worse. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before. Outside, the sirens grew louder. Closer. James noticed. Police? He asked quietly. Ellie didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. You set this up, he said. I didn't set you up, she replied quickly. I was trying to stop something bigger. By lying to me. By getting close to you. The words collided, sharp and unresolved. James stepped forward, closing the distance between them. You should have known how that ends. Ellie didn't move. Maybe I did. For a moment, everything stilled. No movement. No sound. Just two people standing on opposite sides of something that couldn't be undone. Then, a crash. The door burst open behind them, voices shouting, boots hitting the floor. Armed police. Don't move. The room exploded into chaos. James turned instinctively, his focus splitting for just a second, but that was enough. Lights flooded the space, commands overlapping, tension snapping in every direction. Ellie stepped back, her hands slowly raising, but her eyes never left James. This isn't how it was supposed to happen, she said, almost to herself. James didn't respond. Because now, there was no space left for words. Only action. The air felt tight, electric, ready to break. Then, a single shot. Sharp. Loud. Wrong. Ellie's body jerked slightly, her breath catching as she staggered back. For a second, no one moved. No one understood. Because the shot hadn't come from the door. It hadn't come from the police. Ellie looked down, her hand pressing against her side as red spread through her fingers. Confusion flickered across her face. Then realization. She lifted her eyes, searching, not for the officers, not for escape. For something else. Someone else. James followed her gaze instinctively, but there was nothing there. No visible threat. No clear source. Just shadows. Ellie's knees weakened as she sank slightly, her breathing uneven now. And in that moment, the chaos stopped making sense. Because whoever pulled that trigger was never supposed to be there. Whoever pulled that trigger was never supposed to be there. The room froze for half a second too long. Then everything snapped back into motion. Drop your weapon. Get down. Medic, now. Ellie collapsed fully this time, her body hitting the floor with a dull, final weight. Blood spread beneath her, too fast, too dark. Officers rushed forward, voices overlapping, hands pressing, shouting commands that blurred into noise. James didn't move. He stood where he was, eyes fixed on her. Not panic. Not grief. Something colder. Something unfinished. Two officers slammed into him from behind, forcing him down. His hands were wrenched back, metal cuffs snapping tight around his wrists. James Taylor, you are under arrest. The words faded. Because even as they dragged him away, his focus didn't break. Ellie's eyes found his. For a moment, just a moment, everything else disappeared. Her lips moved. No sound came out. But he understood. Or thought he did. Then she was gone from his view, swallowed by uniforms, lights, and urgency. And just like that, it was over. Or at least, that's what the city believed. News spread fast. Faster than truth. By morning, headlines painted the story clean and simple. A feared figure finally taken down. A violent empire dismantled. Justice, swift and decisive. But the reality underneath was messier. Because without James, everything unraveled too easily. Territories once controlled with silence turned chaotic overnight. Deals collapsed. Alliances fractured. People who once stood firm began stepping back, distancing themselves from a name that suddenly felt dangerous in a different way. Fear had held it all together. And now fear had nowhere to go. Reese remained in critical condition, unable to speak further. The few who might have known more chose not to. Because whatever had happened that night, it wasn't finished. James sat in silence as the transport van moved through the city. His reflection stared back at him from the reinforced glass, distorted, unfamiliar. For the first time in years, there were no decisions to make. No moves to plan. Just waiting. The gates opened with a mechanical groan, swallowing the van into a place where power didn't follow the same rules. Inside, the air felt different. Heavier. Controlled. Prison wasn't like the streets. Out there, reputation moved ahead of you. In here, it was tested. Every step. Every glance. Every breath. James walked through intake without resistance. Eyes followed him, guards, inmates, everyone. Some curious. Some cautious. Some calculating. His name had arrived before him. But names didn't hold the same weight behind locked doors. A guard shoved a set of clothes toward him. "You'll wear these now." James didn't respond. Didn't need to. He changed, the fabric rough against his skin, unfamiliar in a way that stripped something deeper than appearance. Identity. The cell door clanged shut behind him later that night, the sound echoing longer than it should have. Small space. Cold walls. Nothing to control. James sat on the edge of the narrow bed, his posture still, his mind anything but. Fragments of the night replayed, Ellie's voice, Reese's words, the shot that didn't belong. It didn't fit. None of it did. Footsteps approached outside the cell, slow, deliberate. Then stopped. "You're him, yeah." James didn't look up immediately. The voice was unfamiliar. Close. Curious. Finally, he lifted his gaze. A man stood just beyond the bars, leaning slightly, studying him with quiet interest. Not afraid. That was new. "You've got a reputation," the man continued. "Heard a lot about you." James said nothing. The man smiled faintly, like he expected that. "Out there," he said, nodding slightly, "you were a king." A pause. Then his expression shifted. Just enough. "But in here." The words settled slowly, deliberately. "You're a target." Silence followed. Not empty. Waiting. "You're a target." The words didn't fade after the man walked away. They stayed. James sat still long after the footsteps disappeared, his gaze fixed on the empty space beyond the bars. In the outside world, a sentence like that would have been meaningless, almost laughable. But here, inside walls that stripped power down to its rawest form, it carried weight. Because in here, reputation wasn't protection. It was provocation. The first few days passed in observation. James didn't rush to establish control. He watched. Measured. Learned the rhythm of the place, the unspoken rules, the shifting alliances, the way tension moved like a current beneath everything. But something was off. People didn't avoid him the way they should have. They watched him, yes, but not with fear. With interest. With calculation. That was new. "You're not what I expected," a voice said during mealtime. James didn't look up immediately. He continued eating, slow, controlled. The man across from him leaned forward slightly. "Thought you'd come in swinging. Making a point." James glanced at him briefly. "Maybe I don't need to." A faint smirk. "Or maybe you can't." That earned a longer look. The man didn't flinch. Around them, conversation softened, attention shifting just enough to notice. James set his tray down carefully. "You testing something?" he asked. The man shrugged. "Just curious how long it takes before you realize, this isn't your world anymore." A pause. Then James stood. The movement alone changed the air. Chairs scraped lightly. Eyes lifted. The room adjusted. But no one moved to stop what might happen next. That was the difference. On the outside, someone would have. In here, they wanted to see. James stepped closer, his presence still carrying that quiet weight, but it didn't bend the room the way it used to. Not completely. "You think I forgot how to adapt?" he said quietly. The man smiled slightly. "I think you forgot what happens when fear stops working." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then James leaned in just enough to make his point. "I don't need fear," he said. The man's smile didn't fade. "That's where you're wrong." The tension held, tight, unresolved, before James stepped back. Not retreating. Repositioning. Because this wasn't a fight he could win the same way. Not yet. Days turned into something heavier. Small confrontations. Subtle challenges. Nothing direct enough to spark a full conflict, but enough to chip away at the idea of control. Old names surfaced. Faces from before. Men who had reasons to remember him, and not all of them with fear. "You left things unfinished," one of them said in passing. James didn't respond. But he remembered. And then came the whispers. Quiet at first. Almost easy to ignore. "She didn't die." The words moved through the prison like smoke, thin, uncertain, but spreading fast. James heard it once. Then again. Then from someone who wouldn't repeat rumors without reason. Ellie. Alive. It didn't make sense. He had seen the blood. The way she fell. The stillness after. But the story didn't fit then. And it didn't fit now. That was the problem. Because if she was alive, then something bigger had been hidden. Something he hadn't seen. And that meant someone was still playing the game. That night, the tension followed him into the shower block. Steam filled the air, thick and blinding. Water hit tile in a constant, echoing rhythm that masked everything else. Visibility was low. Sound distorted. Perfect. James stepped under the water, his posture relaxed, but his awareness sharp. Always sharp. Footsteps. Too many. Too close. He turned slightly. Too late. The first hit came from behind, slamming into his ribs, forcing the air from his lungs. Before he could recover, another followed, sharp, precise. Then another. And another. They didn't speak. Didn't shout. This wasn't anger. This was planned. James tried to push back, his movements instinctive, controlled, but the numbers worked against him. Hands grabbed, strikes landed, pressure building from all sides. He caught one of them, drove his elbow back hard, felt impact, but it didn't stop the others. A blow to his head blurred his vision. Another dropped him to one knee. Water mixed with something darker now, swirling at his feet. Still, he didn't stay down. He forced himself up, swinging blindly, connecting just enough to create space, but not enough to escape. A final hit. Hard. Precise. Everything tilted. Sound faded. The steam thickened. And then, nothing. When the guards finally arrived, it was already over. Bodies scattered. Footsteps gone. Only one figure remained. James lay on the cold tile, barely conscious, his chest rising in uneven breaths. Alive. But just barely. And for the first time. Fear wasn't something he controlled. It was something closing in. Fear wasn't something he controlled anymore. It lingered in the edges of consciousness as James drifted in and out of awareness, the sterile brightness above him cutting through the darkness behind his eyes. The sound of machines, steady, indifferent, replaced the chaos of the shower block. He wasn't dead. That much was clear. But survival didn't feel like victory. It felt like delay. Voices came and went, blurred into fragments. Guards. Medical staff. Questions asked, answers not given. James stayed silent, not because he couldn't speak, but because there was nothing he trusted enough to say. Time lost shape. Minutes or hours, he couldn't tell. Then, "She's alive." The words cut through everything. Not loud. Not urgent. But precise. James's eyes opened slowly, his focus dragging itself back into place. The figure standing near the doorway wasn't familiar, but the tone was certain. "You heard me," the man said, stepping closer. "Ellie." Silence. James didn't move, but something shifted behind his expression. "Where?" he asked, his voice rough, barely steady. The man studied him for a moment, like he was measuring the reaction. "Safe enough," he replied. "Not dead. That's what matters, right?" James didn't answer. Because that wasn't the question. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked instead. A faint smile. Because you're asking the wrong things. The man reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. He placed it on the nearby table, within reach, but didn't hand it directly. Start asking better ones. Then he left. No explanation. No hesitation. James stared at the paper for a long moment before reaching for it. His movements were slower now, heavier, but deliberate. He unfolded it carefully. Inside, photos. Not surveillance. Not distant. Close. Ellie. Different locations. Different times. Not random. Patterned. Purposeful. And then, another image. Reese. Standing beside someone partially obscured. James's grip tightened slightly. The fragments didn't make sense yet. But they were starting to connect. Memory followed. Not in order. Not clean. Pieces. Ellie asking questions that felt too specific. The way she listened, not casually, but intentionally. The pauses before she answered. The moments she seemed to know more than she should. It hadn't been instinct. It had been direction. Reese. The thoughts surfaced harder now. His distance. His hesitation. The way he reacted when Ellie was mentioned. The way his name had been used, conveniently, precisely. It wasn't me. James closed his eyes briefly. Then opened them again. The image of Ellie on the floor, the blood, the confusion in her eyes, it didn't match betrayal. It matched interruption. Something had gone wrong. Not just for him. For her too. Which meant she wasn't the one in control. James sat up slightly, ignoring the pull of pain through his body. The pieces were there now, scattered but visible. Ellie wasn't just an informant. She had been placed. Close enough to see everything. Close enough to matter. But not for the reasons he thought. Another memory surfaced. One he hadn't considered before. A name. Not spoken often. Not lightly. From years ago. Before everything. Before the streets. Before the empire. Back when choices weren't entirely his. The mentor. The man who had taught him how to survive. How to think. How to control. James's expression hardened. Because Ellie's interest, her focus, it wasn't random. It was personal. Connected to something buried. Something unfinished. He looked back at the photograph. Reese standing beside that shadowed figure. The angle. The posture. Familiar. Too familiar. And then it clicked. Not fully. But enough. The kind of realization that doesn't explode. It settles. Cold. Certain. Because the man behind all of this. The one who set the pieces in motion. The one who placed Ellie, turned Reese, and broke everything apart. Wasn't a stranger. Wasn't a rival. Wasn't even an enemy. He was someone James had trusted once. Someone he had followed. Learned from. Believed in. Someone who was supposed to be dead. And now, he was pulling the strings. And now, he was pulling the strings. The realization didn't explode into anger. It settled into something colder, sharper, like a blade finally finding its edge. James stood in the dim corridor outside the infirmary, his body still aching, every movement carrying the weight of the attack. But pain had never been something that stopped him. It focused him. You look like you've seen a ghost. The voice came from behind. Familiar. Too familiar. James didn't turn immediately. You should be dead, he said quietly. A soft chuckle followed. I get that a lot. James turned. And there he was. Not a shadow. Not a memory. Real. Older, maybe. Thinner. But the same eyes. The same stillness. The same presence that once filled every space without effort. The man who had taught him everything. Miss me? He asked, leaning casually against the wall. James stared at him, expression unreadable. You're the one behind this. Behind? The man repeated. No. I prefer above. The arrogance didn't feel forced. It felt earned. Ellie, James said. Reese. The setup. The man nodded slightly. Pieces. Necessary ones. For what? A pause. Then, simply, for you. The answer didn't confuse him. It confirmed something deeper. "This was never about taking me down," James said slowly. "No," the man agreed. "It was about showing you what you really are." Silence stretched between them, thick with years unspoken. "You built something impressive," the man continued. "Fear, control, loyalty, all of it balanced on one idea." James didn't respond. "That you were untouchable." A faint shift in the air. "But you were always just predictable." That was enough. James moved first. No warning. No hesitation. His fist connected hard, snapping the man's head back, but not dropping him. Not even close. The man staggered once, then smiled. "Good," he said, wiping blood from his lip. "I was hoping you'd still have that in you." The fight wasn't clean. It wasn't controlled. It wasn't about dominance. It was about release. Years of buried anger, confusion, betrayal, all of it surfaced in every strike. James pushed forward, relentless, ignoring the pain in his ribs, the weakness in his body. But the man matched him. Step for step. Blow for blow. Not stronger. Not faster. Just prepared. "You still don't see it," the man said between hits. "That's your problem." James drove him into the wall, gripping his collar. "Then explain it." The man laughed, actually laughed. "You think this ends with answers?" A sharp movement. James didn't see it coming. The counter hit landed clean. Hard. James staggered back, his vision blurring for a second too long. "That's the difference between us," the man said, stepping forward. "You needed control." Another hit. James tried to recover. Too slow. "I needed truth." Another. "And the truth is, everything you built." The final strike came without warning. Precise. Devastating. "It was never yours." The world tilted. Sound dropped out. James felt himself falling, but not like before. Not from weakness. Not from numbers. From something deeper. Something final. As he hit the ground, everything that had defined him, fear, power, control, felt distant. Hollow. Stripped. For the first time, there was nothing left to hold on to. No identity. No illusion. Just silence. The man stood over him for a moment, watching, not with anger, not with satisfaction. With certainty. Then he turned and walked away. By the time the guards arrived, it was already over. "Get him up, careful." "He's out cold." "Who did this?" No answer. Just the echo of footsteps fading into nothing. James didn't move. Didn't react. Didn't exist in that moment. But even in the darkness, fragments remained. Voices. Faint. Distant. Heard something about the girl. Thought she didn't make it. Ellie, right. A pause. Then. "She's alive. She's alive." The words followed him out of the darkness. Not like hope. Not like relief. Like consequence. James's eyes opened slowly, the harsh light above him cutting through what remained of the void. His body felt different, heavier, slower, like something essential had been removed rather than damaged. For a moment, he didn't move. Didn't think. Didn't reach for the instincts that had once defined him. Because they weren't there anymore. The room was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that didn't press, it lingered. Waited. A guard stood near the door, watching him with mild curiosity. "You're awake," he said. James blinked once, adjusting. No tension followed. No shift in control. Just awareness. "Yeah," the guard added, almost to himself. "Didn't think you would be." James sat up slowly. The movement hurt, but the pain felt distant, disconnected from anything meaningful. "Where is she?" he asked. The guard hesitated. "You mean the girl?" No response. "That's not my department," the guard said. "But word is, she made it." Made it. The phrase felt incomplete. Like surviving was only part of the story. Days passed, but they didn't carry the same weight anymore. James moved through them without urgency, without calculation. The prison remained the same, loud, tense, unpredictable, but his place in it had shifted. Not lower. Not higher. Just different. People still watched him. But not the same way. The edge was gone. The fear he once controlled had faded, not replaced, not transferred, just gone. And without it, everything else felt exposed. He didn't try to rebuild. Didn't assert dominance. Didn't respond to quiet provocations that would have once demanded consequence. Because for the first time, he wasn't playing the same game. Ellie came back into the story without warning. Not in person. Not directly. But in fragments. A report left where it could be found. A passing comment from someone who shouldn't have known her name. A glimpse of a photograph. Brief, almost accidental. Enough. She was alive. But not untouched. The image stayed with him, the way she had fallen, the confusion in her eyes. That moment hadn't ended anything. It had changed everything. Now, the pieces made more sense. She hadn't been just an informant. Not just a pawn. She had her own reason. Her own past tied into his. Something rooted deeper than the operation. Deeper than the setup. And whatever truth she had been chasing, it had cost her just as much. James sat alone one evening, the noise of the prison fading into the background. His hands rested loosely in front of him, no tension, no intent. For years, he had built something out of fear. Controlled it. Shaped it. Believed it made him untouchable. But fear wasn't strength. It was dependency. And once it disappeared, so did the illusion. Footsteps approached. Slow. Unhurried. James didn't look up immediately. "You're quieter than I expected." The voice was new. Unfamiliar. James lifted his gaze. A man stood just outside the cell, younger, sharper in his posture. His expression wasn't cautious. Wasn't curious. It was direct. "You're James Taylor, yeah?" No answer. The man smiled slightly. "Thought so." A pause settled between them, not heavy, not tense. Just measured. "I've heard stories," the man continued. "About what you were." James held his gaze, calm, unreadable. Not defensive. Not dominant. Just present. The man leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice, not out of fear, but intention. "Out there, they whispered your name like it meant something." Another pause. Then, "But in here." His smile didn't fade. It sharpened. "I'm not scared of you." Silence followed. Not empty. Not waiting. Something else entirely. Because this time, the name didn't echo with fear. It echoed with challenge.